From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday Edition, coming to you from my home in Holiday, Utah. This morning, this week, we're going to be talking about a lawsuit that the state of Utah, along with other states involved in and filing an antitrust lawsuit against Google. We're going to get into that. There's a term out right now that is so important, and it's called home insecurity, and what effect that's having on society, but especially with Lois Collins from the Deseret News toward the tail end of the program. We're going to talk about the effect that that's having on our kids, not only here in the state of Utah, but around the country. But the bad news this week, some of the numbers we're beginning to see, not only in Utah, but around the country, but we'll especially focus on our numbers right here at home. When it comes to COVID, we're seeing some spiking and cases are up. And we're very pleased this morning to have Dr. Mark Briesacker joining us, and he is with Intermountain Healthcare, physician executive. And Doctor, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And maybe you could set the stage. We're seeing the highest numbers right now. Last Thursday, the only number I have at my disposal right now, that's a 4-month high. What's happening in our state?
Well, Doug, first of all, thank you for having me on. And, you know, I think what's happening in our state is a combination of factors. I think the main thing is the fact that we still have a large percentage of people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. This makes them very susceptible to any exposure that they have as they go about their daily lives. The second factor is the Delta variant, and this is a variant of the original virus that is much, much more contagious. In fact, some of the symptoms have even evolved, and many people with the Delta variant now have more of a runny nose and cough and the typical cold symptoms, as opposed to the aches and the fatigue and some of the gastrointestinal symptoms that were so present with the first virus. And of course, I think, as you know, colds and viruses are spread so easily through droplets and through running noses and coughs. And probably the third thing that's happening, Doug, is the fact that so many people who got sick with the virus in the beginning, their immunity, if they had immunity from being sick, that immunity is really beginning to wane. So those things together is what's driving these numbers.
Which can do the most damage, the original variety or now this Delta variant? Which is more likely to, I'll just ask it straight up, kill you?
You know, they are both equally good at that still. So, and I think this is a really important point. So the Delta variant is more contagious, but there's been several studies that have come out and have shown that it does not result in more severe disease. Now, I don't think we should be reassured by that, though, Doug, because this virus is a very serious virus to get. And while there are many people who have symptoms that don't result in hospitalization, there still are plenty that do end up in our hospitals. And our hospitals have been seeing a steady increase in the number of people admitted to the floors and admitted to our intensive care units.
I know several weeks ago, as the governor was doing his monthly press conference, he actually got emotional when he talked about, and something to the effect, I'm not quoting it exactly, but he said the last 18 people to die in the state of Utah were not vaccinated. They didn't have to die. And I mean, he was emotional about that. Are we seeing those numbers continue? Is the real threat still primarily on every level of hospitalization, getting sick, and even dying? Is it among those who are not vaccinated?
Yes, that is absolutely the case. And I really appreciated the governor's vulnerability and how candid he is about how it makes him feel. And I got to tell you, that's how I feel. That's how every physician and nurse and pharmacist and ICU tech, you have this deep sadness knowing that the person you're caring for who is struggling for their life, they didn't have to be there. They could have received a vaccine that is very safe and very effective. One of the most effective vaccines that we actually have across all of the things that we vaccinate for. So it it is sad, and it's mostly sad, Doug, obviously for that person and their family and their friends. And I wish that
Right.
I wish people would think about that as they work to getting to a decision for themselves about getting vaccinated.
I understand that the core of the Wasatch Front, Davis and Salt Lake and Utah County are doing fairly well. Some others are, obviously, but we have 12 that are outliers among our 29 states, 29 counties rather, within the state. And that appears to be the 12 counties that have 60% or thereabout vaccination rates compared to the 70% elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty simple formula of if fewer people you come in contact with are vaccinated, then more of them are potentially spreading the disease. And as we know with this virus, you can spread this disease and not even have symptoms. And that's why this is such a highly communicable disease.
We need to ask a question at this time of year, especially. Quite often, our emergency rooms, our ICU units, have other issues with us being in the outdoors. I mean, even heat-related issues and so on. We tend to have a shortage of beds at some times, not critical shortage normally, but more than usual occupancy. How is this spike in COVID going to mesh with the uptick that we tend to see, especially in emergency situations and more intensive care areas? If these two collide, how serious could that be?
Well, I think that this is a really important question, and in each individual case, in any given moment, it could be really serious. Last week, for the first time since in months, Doug, we had to activate the coordination point amongst the different Utah health systems because several of us have very full ICUs. And just like in the pandemic, we continue to work extremely carefully and in a collaborative way so that when any ambulance calls and says they're transporting a patient, when any other hospital calls and says, a hospital down in say, rural Utah, San Pete, Beaver, Iron counties, they call saying we have to transfer a patient because they're getting really, really sick. We work together to make sure that in that moment, that person, that family is cared for and they get to the right level of care. And that's independent of wherever the bed is, wherever there are the right resources to care for them. But that's a reflection of the stress that we are now experiencing again. And it is due to the fact that we have more trauma. I'm so glad people are out and driving and recreating and hiking, but that does lead to accidents. We have to be able to care for them. We have to be able to care for people who have heart disease, who have cancer, and all of these conditions can lead to a hospitalization and an ICU admission. And so it's why it's just so important that if we're thinking about getting a vaccine against COVID, now's the time to do that.
Dr. Briesacher, is that the bottom line? If you were to give one sentence of advice or admonition to Utahns, would it be get vaccinated?
I'll stick with advice because it's such a personal decision for everyone. And my advice is keep asking the questions. Keep learning about the benefits and the risks. Keep thinking about how to resolve conflicting information that you might have received, and be curious and do this because this is a really serious illness. It can be serious for you, for kids, and especially for our older adults and our grandparents. It's a safe vaccine. I would encourage you to get it, and if you are in that group that has been waiting, now would be the time to go ahead and get that vaccine. It's for you and for others. That's what I'd say, Doug.
Dr. Brisacker, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Edition. We so appreciate your participation and your expertise. Coming up next, the state of Utah is on board and actually leading the charge on a lawsuit, antitrust lawsuit with Google. We'll talk about that next. This week, the state of Utah, along with quite a few other states, our Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit with tech giant Google. And here with us today from the Attorney General's office is David Sonnenreich, and he is over the antitrust section. He's the director from the AG's office here in our state. David, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Edition. And maybe, in a nutshell, you could tell us what is unfolding. What's this lawsuit all about?
Doug, thank you for having me on. I am compelled to say at the beginning that the views I express are my own and not necessarily those of the Attorney General's or the joined. But what's this case about? Well, basically, this case looks at the Android operating system, and it looks at two particular aspects of Google's control of that operating system. One is the Google Play Store and how we get our apps on our Android cell phones. And the other is Google Play Billing, which is how you pay for things you purchase inside an app that affects the app itself. So, for example, we're talking about purchases in apps, things like levels of games, or when a business gets a free app, but it wants to expand it from 5 users to 50 users, that sort of thing.
Our Attorney General, Sean Reyes, called this a menace to the marketplace. How is it, maybe other than a cost inequity, how is it a menace to the marketplace?
Well, first of all, we think that the control of how apps get onto cell phones limits innovation and reduces consumer choice. And likewise, controlling the price, because Google charges a 30% charge when people buy things inside their apps, purchases inside their apps. Well, if, for example, you are buying similar content for a video game just on a website on a computer, the fee might be 2 or 3 or 4%. So that differential causes less innovation. It reduces consumer choice. It raises prices. And it's all a result of Google's control of the Android system that they can impose this burden upon app developers to use their payment system.
Is this the way it's been from square one, or has this been creeping up and now has become something really burdensome?
Well, you know, it started out when the Android operating system was just gaining traction. Google made a point of not trying to profit from it. They wanted to encourage people to use it. And they have, as you say, taken this in steps, sometimes big steps. But the biggest step that is coming up in the future is that at this moment, Google is starting to impose this 30% fee upon streaming services, which previously they were not always imposing it upon. And that will go into effect fully by September. That will affect a lot of consumers potentially. It's been involved on games and a variety of other types of app purchases for some time.
Is this only with Android? For those of us that are iPhone users, we're kind of in the Microsoft world. Are we affected?
No, the Apple iPhone is a different issue, a different system. This is about the Google system. Now, Apple also charges a fee of up to 30%, and Google charges a fee of up to 30%. But this lawsuit is targeted on Google, not on Apple. They're different.
How many states are on board? I seem to recall 37, but I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Your research is correct. It is 37 states.
And where is Utah's position? I've read various articles on this, and it seems that we are leading out. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct. There are. We're part of a 4-state leadership team. The other states are North Carolina, Tennessee, and New York. And but Utah is the caption state. That is, we're the lead state on the pleading. We were probably the primary state in the investigation. All the other states I mentioned, and many of the other 37 states actively participated too.
That is a number that would pass a constitutional amendment, yet Google is saying that this is all meritless. Maybe you could walk us through their thinking on that.
Well, I understand what Google's arguments are. We obviously don't agree with them, and we've listened to them and we don't believe those arguments are meritorious. Google does point to the fact that Apple has a similar fee, but then Apple can also maintain that fee through its monopoly control of the iPhone system, which is another matter for another day. Just because somebody else does something doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. The situation here is about the operating system for Android phones, and in particular about the fact that Google imposes these rules not just on a phone that Google makes, but rather on phones that are made by other manufacturers. You should have the freedom to innovate and to create new products for the marketplace.
Do you anticipate relatively, I know anything in the legal system tends to be rather slow, but how quickly could this move along? What are your projections?
Well, our projection is that we filed this in the Northern District of California, where there are other similar cases already in front of that court. And that judge is inclined, Judge Donato, to try these cases in the spring of next year. And we're going to do our best to be ready for that trial date, too. So this could go very quickly.
David, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Edition. Give our best to the Attorney General. We look forward to getting more information on this, and have a great weekend.
Thank you again for having us on the show. Much appreciated.
Coming up next on Sunday Edition, what about home insecurity? A lot of Utahns, a lot of people around the country, the numbers, especially when it comes to children, are somewhat startling, and the effect on children as well. We'll talk about all that next on Sunday Edition. Anybody that has been paying any attention at all to housing prices right now, the availability of certain properties, the rental spikes that are happening not only here in Utah but around the country, boy, everybody understands just how crazy that is, but yet wages certainly are not keeping up. And a real concern is the insecurity that comes with the homelessness and even home insecurity. What price are we paying as a society, our families, but particularly our children? I'm delighted that my friend Lois Collins, a reporter with the Deseret News, could join us. She has looked into this, has written a great article about it. And Lois, welcome to Sunday Edition. And let's talk a little bit about this. Maybe you could set the stage. How bad are things right now when it comes to home insecurity in general?
Well, there are a whole bunch of things going on right now, and they've been made worse by the pandemic, but this was happening before the pandemic. In 2018, official data shows that 112,000 kids were homeless on a single night. So that's a lot of kids already. And then when you start thinking about what's happening with people who are losing their jobs. Right now, there's a freeze that's just about to expire on evictions, but there are so many people who don't know where they're going to go. And it's hard to quantify because there are people who are couch surfing. There are people who are living on the bubble. There are people who are staying doubled up in homes, people living in cars. We tend to think that people who are homeless or housing insecure are in shelters or on the street, and that's just not the case. So it's really hard to figure out how bad it is, but everybody agrees it's really bad.
In your article, I read where the number of homes, percentage of kids in homes, and this was a troubling term, burdened by housing costs. Now, this is above and beyond just trying to make a budget work. This is unusual stuff, but that number is 30%. 30% of our children are in that situation right now. What are some of the experts, those who study long-term effects especially, how is this going to affect those kids?
So they're saying that we can expect to see kids who maybe don't get the education that they should get because they're moving from school to school. Families may not have the paperwork they need. Incredible burden placed on kids just by the stress that parents have. And kids feel the stress. They know what's going on, even from a pretty young age. So there are going to be maybe behavior problems. There definitely is going to be more anxiety and depression and upset and turmoil. And we already know that depression and anxiety among kids is really high. It's sort of an unprecedented issue right now. So this is something to really pay attention to. But it goes beyond just the kids, too, because these kids are going to grow up to be adults. And what kind of adults are they going to be? What kind of trauma, or in some cases, even post-traumatic stress, are they going to take with them into the future? And that's something that people, it doesn't matter what your politics are, people on all sides of the political aisle are saying, what are we going to do about the kids? Because the economy depends on them. The welfare of the country depends on them. Fertility depends on them. It's all intertwined with what happens to these little guys.
The social costs in the long term are, any society at any time wants to look at that. How are things going to look here in one generation, in a decade, in 2 decades, or 3 decades? And with this scenario, you really do wonder, and there are some real concerns. And some of the information that I gleaned from your article really are distressing. You know, we talk about buying a home, and we talk about home insecurity in general. But when I was reading what you had written, and that now 1 in 4 renters, 25% in other words, are paying more than half of their income, 1/2 of their income in their housing costs, renters and then also home buyers. It is unsustainable.
It's crazy. It's not going to work. And there are a lot of things that contribute to it. Part of it is that we tend to think short term. So I don't know about you, but I want mine today. I'm not worried so much about what happens tomorrow. So a lot of the housing market has been propped up by well-to-do people who sort of, I'm trying to think what word I want. They sort of prop up their kids' ability to get homes. But that means that if you don't have well-to-do parents, or if you're not subsidized, then you can't find a place that's livable, or you cannot get into a place. You can't get credit in a place. And there are a lot of people who aren't in a position to do that. And it used to be that housing stock was very varied. You had really nice houses and you had decent houses, but there were affordable houses available. And now the Home Builders Association, the National Home Builders Association, says that in the last decade or so, only about 1% of homes that have been built for people who don't have a lot of resources. Less than 1% is built for people who make between $100,000 and $150,000. I mean, the price of the home is $100,000 to $150,000. So there are a lot of people who are not going to get into that kind of house.
Lois, it was the most enlightening article. People can find it at DeseretNews.com. We appreciate you joining us on the program. And that does it for Sunday edition, Music and the Spoken Word.